We're less than a month into Knights of the Frozen Throne, and they've already announced some balance changes. I'm not sure if I should be proud of Blizzard for addressing the problem so soon, or disappointed that they just literally didn't playtest the expansion. So what actually got changed? They hit Innervate, hell yes, Fiery War Axe, Hex, Murloc Warleader, and Spreading Plague. In the first little couple paragraphs here, they basically just say that they targeted basic and classic cards because the more powerful basic and classic cards there are, the less impactful expansions feel. And they also say that for some reason they don't like doing Hall of Fame in the middle of the year. I don't really get that, but whatever. Like, the point of Hall of Fame is to pull problematic cards out of Standard. But, like, how many more problematic cards do you expect to have to Hall of Fame? That this is going to be like a regular yearly thing. Eventually you're going to run out of cards to Hall of Fame. I don't know, it just seems weird that they really have that stance with the Hall of Fame. But whatever. So first up we have an Innervate nerf, hell yeah. If you've watched any of my other videos, you probably know that this is my least favorite card in all of Hearthstone, or at least it used to be. Instead of giving you 2 mana crystals, it now gives you 1, so they made it counterfeit coin. I don't really know what change I would have gone for, but this seems really, really inelegant. And I'm pretty sure the card is dead. The biggest impact of an Innervate nerf is to aggro Druid. This means you can't just cheese out wins with turn 1 Fledgling, turn 2 Hydra. And those cheesy early wins were a big part of the power level of aggro Druid. And this also means that you can't like play a bunch of shitters and on turn 2 Innervate out Mark of the Lotus or Power of the Wild or whatever. So I think this nerf, not only does it kill Innervate, I think it might actually just straight up kill aggro Druid. Aggro Druid does still have a lot of powerful tools, but I feel like most of their power came from cheating that stuff out early. Maybe the cards are just so good that they go a little bit slower, maybe they start incorporating like Bone Mares, maybe the Strong Shell Scavenger lists start seeing more play. But as far as Vicious Fledglings, Bittertide Hydras, I think those lists are pretty much dead, which is great. Now, as far as Jade Druid goes, I do think this is a significant nerf to Jade Druid, but I don't think it's nearly as big a deal as it is in Aggro Druid. The big impact of this in Jade Druid is basically you can't Innervate Jade Blossom on turn 1 anymore, you can't Innervate Nourish on turn 3, and you can't Innervate Ultimate Infestation on turn 5. And speaking of Ultimate Infestation, the drawback of Ultimate Infestation should be that if you're drawing 5 cards, you're just going to have a lot of cards in your hand, which can be pretty awkward and sometimes it'll force you to overdraw. And one of the best ways to get around that was just to play Innervate. So if you have too many cards in your hand, you can just start with like Wrath, Innervate, and then play Ultimate Infestation. Or if you have 2 Innervates in the deck, you just throw out the Ultimate Infestation, and most of the time you're probably going to draw an Innervate. And even if you don't have a great Innervate play, you can get it out of your hand so you don't overdraw next turn. It does also mean that there's not going to be any more like turn 3 Ayas, which was pretty tough to deal with. It just makes their curves quite a bit more awkward. So I think Jade Druid is going to feel this nerf, but I don't think this kills the Jade Druid. Down here they talk a little bit about Counterfeit Coin. Yeah, Counterfeit Coin sees play in Rogue because it's Rogue and not Druid. Rogue plays Gadgets and Auctioneer, which Druid can play Gadgets and Auctioneer. Maybe with the nerf to Innervate, they'll look at that. But Rogue can also play Edwin Van Cleef and other combo cards. And the fact that you can just like double Counterfeit Coin, prep some bullshit, and backstab and play Edwin as a 14-14 on turn 1 is a pretty big reason that Counterfeit Coin sees play. And I don't think Druid is enough like Rogue that Counterfeit Coin is going to see play in Druid. I could be wrong. If more combo-based Druid decks come about, Innervate is definitely still a card we need to be worried about. But for the most part, in Aggro Druid and Jade Druid, even in Ramp Druid, pretty much any non-combo Druid, I think Innervate is dead now. Which is great, because fuck Innervate. Next up we have Fiery War Axe. It's going to cost 3 mana instead of 2 now. So now it's just a worse Eaglehorn Bow or Rallying Blade, which is kind of funny because it used to be that those were just shitty Fiery War Axes, but now Fiery War Axe is just a shitty Eaglehorn Bow. This makes me a little bit sad, because this is very obviously a Pirate Warrior nerf, and I feel like if they wanted to nerf Pirate Warrior, they could have just done something to, I don't know, Patches, Bloodsail Cultist, maybe even like Frothing Berserker is kind of an issue. But they did end up going for the War Axe, mostly because it's been in pretty much every competitive warrior deck since the dawn of time, and I guess that's not really healthy for any card. I kinda wish that they had just, like, shifted warriors' class identity to just purely be controls, stop giving them aggressive cards, and then just let Fiery War Axe be an overpowered turn 2 weapon. Because yeah, it's overpowered in control, but the reason weapons are so good is because they're so good at tempo, and in Control Warrior, you're not really getting too much tempo out of the card. It's just a value card, and it's a damn good value card. But I think it's acceptable within the confines of a Control Warrior. But when you let this exist within an aggro deck, it's just too good at what it does. Fiery War Axe just beats like every other aggressive deck off the board. It goes face for 6 damage for 2 mana, which is like, what the fuck? It's also kind of interesting that I think King's Defender is the card is now just better than this, which is really strange, since it's also a warrior card, but whatever. But anyway, as far as actual metagame implications go, I think this kills the Pirate Warrior, at least in its current form. 2 mana cards in Hearthstone really suck right now, so as Pirate Warrior, you were really hoping to hit this or Bloodsail Raider on turn 2, and if you didn't, your win rate dropped like some ridiculous amount. I don't actually have any stats, but if it dropped like 15% by missing those 2/2-drops, I wouldn't be surprised. And as far as all the like neutral 2-drops go, there's not really a good replacement. Maybe they try to make Pirate Warrior a Keleseth deck now, but it's kind of hard to imagine that working out. At turn 3, this just comes out too late for Pirate Warrior. You can't coin it out and then curve it into a Bloodsail Raider. You're 1 turn slower on cheesing out Dread Corsairs. This conflicts with your Frothing Berserkers and Cultists and South Sea Captains on turn 3. I just don't see Pirate Warriors surviving without their overpowered 2-mana weapon to start stacking their upgrades on. Maybe the archetype can survive if they shift up a little bit and start playing maybe like Bone Mare or something, but I don't really see it. As far as Control Warrior goes, I think Control Warrior probably still has to play Fiery War Axe, because you need something to do early on. And I don't think this really competes with too many turn 3 plays from the Warrior. I guess Acolyte of Pain. I guess this does make Forge of Souls look a little bit more appealing, because now you can play Forge on 2 and then draw your War Axe for turn 3. But it also makes Bloodrazor a little bit less appealing, because now you don't really have the 2-turn gap between your 2 weapons. You actually get the full value out of their charges, so that's a little bit awkward. But basically, I think Pirate Warrior is dead. I think this drastically affects the power level of any aggressive warriors. I think it does affect the power level of Control Warrior, but they probably still have to play it. And I kind of wish that they had just made aggro not viable for Warrior instead of killing Fiery War Axe. But the card was definitely overpowered at 2. Hex is a little bit surprising because it doesn't really see any play right now, but the card is definitely overtuned. If you compare it to like Polymorph, it costs 1 less mana for basically no reason. I don't really have much to say about this because mid-range Shaman isn't really a thing right now, but I think when mid-range or Control Shaman come back into the meta, they're probably still going to play Hex, because are you really that upset that you have to spend 4 mana answering their Tyrion instead of 3? I think I'm still okay with that. Yeah, I have a lot less to say about the Hex nerf. I think it's fine. I think they were probably planning this anyway, and they were just like, oh shit, we have to do something about Druid, so I guess we'll nerf Hex too at the same time, instead of going for 2 separate balance changes within the next few months or something. Murloc Warleader, it no longer gives your Murlocs health, which is actually huge. The whole Murloc gimmick is just like snowballing the board really early, and the main way you do that is you just keep ahead of their board clears by giving your stuff extra health with like the +1 from the Warleader, or Megasaur or Coldlight Seer. And now that you can't do that with Murloc Warleader anymore, it makes things like Hellfire and Consecration a lot more appealing to play against Murlocs. I think this dramatically decreases the power level of the card. So obviously the relevant Murloc deck right now is Murloc Paladin, and I think Murloc Paladin will probably survive this nerf, because you still get to push a bunch of damage with your Warleaders. Rockpool Hunter and Gentle Megasaur are still ridiculously overpowered, but it's going to be easier to deal with Murloc Paladin boards. If nothing else, I think this will just make the deck more fair, so you can actually respond to their things, and not just like miss 1 turn of removal so you just instantly lose the game to Warleader, because it pushes everything out of range at the same time as pushing more damage. That's the huge difference between this and Coldlight Seer. Like, Coldlight Seer will keep all your stuff alive, but you're not pushing extra damage. Murloc Warleader keeps all your stuff alive and does 8 face damage, which is pretty nuts. So as much as I do think that Murloc Paladin, in something very similar to its current form, will probably survive, there is some chance that this nerf just kills the deck, and I think it's also very likely that unless they print more overpowered Murloc cards, which apparently they're quite willing to do with Rockpool Hunter and Gentle Megasaur, but unless they print more overpowered Murloc cards, I think it's going to be pretty tough for Murlocs to be relevant once Paladin loses like Vilefin Inquisitor and Grimscale Chum. Also, back in Mean Streets, people were playing the Water package, which was Finja, double Bluegill, and double Warleader. And then you'd attack with Finja and you would either get shit that buffed your board or chargers that went face or traded or whatever. I think with this nerf to Warleader, the Water package is dead. And even in regular Murloc decks, I think it dramatically decreases the power level of Finja, which is kind of a bummer because Finja was kind of cool, but Finja in the decks where it actually worked was maybe a little bit overpowered. So I guess it will be nice to not get cheesed by that anymore. But basically the recap, the Water package is dead, Murloc Paladin probably still survives in some capacity, and other Murloc decks are probably hit super hard by this nerf. Spreading Plague, so we finally get to the Jade Druid nerf. Goes up to 6 mana. The thing about this going up to 6 mana is they still have Wild Growth and Jade Blossom and Nourish, which means that they can still play this pretty early, but it is going to give aggressive decks more time to kill the Druid before they can play Spreading Plague and win the game on the spot. This also gets another slight nerf because I don't believe any deck that's playing this will be playing Innervate anymore, so you can't play this a turn before you should if you missed your Wild Growth or whatever. And that also means in the late game it's harder to Spreading Plague plus do another thing, or Nourish into Spreading Plague, or even like a turn 6 Plague Innervate Doomsayer, which is a pretty common play. But I think the card is probably still good. If you're still alive and can cast this against aggro, it does a lot to stop them from killing you. One notable thing is that at 6 mana it does compete with both Aya and Jade Behemoth, whereas on turn 5 it was only competing with Nourish. So that might make the card a little bit more awkward. Like I said, late game you can't on 10 mana Nourish into this. But I think the card is still good. I think it will probably still see play in Jade Druid. And I guess talking about Jade Druid, I really don't think Jade Druid got nerfed that hard. I think it's probably still going to be a high tier deck. They definitely feel the Innervate and Spreading Plague nerfs. Probably even the Innervate one they feel a little bit more than the Spreading Plague nerf. But they also nerfed Murloc Paladin, which was the only non-Druid deck that had a good win rate against Druid. And they nerfed Aggro Druid, which was the only other deck that had a good win rate against Jade Druid. And they also nerfed Pirate Warrior, which I'm not actually sure what the matchup percentage with Pirate Warrior versus Jade Druid is, but I have to imagine it's not one of the Druid's favorite matchups. So they nerfed slightly Druid's ability to interact with aggro decks, but they also nerfed all 3 relevant aggro decks. And as we know, Jade Druid just beats everything that's not those aggro decks. So, kinda seems like Jade Druid might still be really good. Feels a little bit reminiscent of the big balance change a year ago when Shaman was everywhere. And then they nerfed Shaman, but they were like, man, we gotta nerf some other stuff too. And then Shaman got better, because then mid-range Shaman just didn't have bad matchups. I'm a little bit worried that might be happening with Jade Druid. But even if that does happen with Jade Druid, I'll take it since we got an Innervate nerf, and fuck Innervate. So quick recap, Jade Druid does get nerfed, but I think the other nerfs to the metagame might make it actually like about as good or maybe even better. Pirate Warrior's dead, Aggro Druid's dead, Murloc Paladin takes a nice smack, Hex got nerfed for some reason. I really don't think this patch did all that much to make Jade Druid worse. And it also seems like this patch has been pretty good for Raza Priest, which is also incredibly annoying to play against. And if Jade Druid isn't still king after this patch, then Raza Priest probably will be. So every game will be decided by whether or not you draw Raza and Anduin early. My understanding, I haven't really played it, but my understanding of the Raza Priest mirror is basically whoever draws Raza plus Anduin first just wins, so that'll be fun. Also, it's worth noting that the shitty aggro decks like Every Hunter deck and Zoo probably get better with this because they were oppressed really heavily by Fiery War Axe and by Aggro Druid. So now that those are out of the way, maybe Hunter doesn't have the worst early game of every aggro deck, and maybe Zoo can actually compete. Maybe they can be what keeps Jade Druid and maybe Priest in check. It'll be kind of interesting to see how that works out. Token Shaman gets a huge buff with the nerf to Spreading Plague, because now they have one more turn to line stuff up and then just Bloodlust through the Spreading Plague. They still get fucked pretty hard by Spreading Plague, but the one extra turn to react to it with either a Bloodlust or a Devolve, I think is a pretty big deal. And now Token Shaman also doesn't have to worry about the other OP aggro decks. Miracle Rogue probably gets a pretty nice buff because they got farmed by Pirate Warrior, and their matchups against Aggro Druid and Jade Druid were both pretty bad too, I think, and probably Murloc Paladin. And lastly, I think Mage is pretty happy about these balance changes. Exodia Mage got farmed by Pirate Warrior, and just does pretty poorly against aggressive decks in general, and a lot of those got nerfed. It wasn't really that good against Jade Druid, because Jade Druid could just be the aggressor, and Innervate was a big role player in that game plan. So maybe Exodia Mage is the new cancer. It probably at least gets a little bit better. So even if this patch doesn't kill Jade Druid, which I would have liked because I just hate the Jade mechanic and I hate Druid basically. Although maybe I don't hate Druid now that Innervate's gone. But even if it doesn't, it should at least make the metagame more exciting, since Murloc Paladin, Aggro Druid, and Pirate Warrior all take significant nerfs. And the fact that all three of those decks basically just came right over from Ungorio, changed like 2 cards, and still dominated. The fact that that happened has just made this metagame so boring. So even if Hunter becomes the new cancer, even if Exodia Mage becomes the new cancer, it'll at least be more interesting than continuing for the next 3 months to lose the decks that we've been losing to for the last 5. Overall, I'm pleased, but still worried about Jade Druid and Raza Priest.